Today we are speaking with Linda Green, the director of the URI Watershed Watch program for the last 23 years and a research associate in the Department of Natural Resources Science at the University of Rhode Island. The Watershed Watch program is a science-based volunteer water quality monitoring program which generates virtually all of Rhode Island's lake water quality monitoring data. Linda, nice to see you.
Thanks.
Can you tell us what the primary focus of the URI Watershed Watch program is?
Well, our primary focus is to involve the public in learning about their lakes, their rivers, their streams, or their salt ponds. We do that by teaching them how to go out and do water quality monitoring, providing them the tools. We have a laboratory to analyze samples, and we get them out in the water. And right now we've got about 400 volunteers on about 250 sites all over Rhode Island.
250 sites in Rhode Island.
Yes, I would have to say that I think we have more volunteer monitors per square mile here in Rhode Island than any other place in the country.
Well, that's good to hear. A little bit unbelievable, but what is your position with the Watershed Watch program?
I'm in charge of the program. I'm the program director. I was here virtually since the start, and I set the goals for the program, helped do the training. I'm in charge of the analytical laboratory, and whatever else needs to be done.
And as the laboratories are located on URI campus.
Right.
Can you tell me about what equipment is available to you?
Sure. Well, we're very fortunate working at URI. URI has been massively supportive in our program. So there are two staff persons, myself and Elizabeth Heron, who's the program coordinator. We have 4 or 5 students. And our lab has a number of analytical instruments in it that we can use. As a matter of fact, it's a state certified laboratory, and actually there's only 2 state certified laboratories on the URI campus.
What would be the other one?
URI Crime Lab.
Oh, really? Okay. And can you tell me about the importance of water quality and how it affects more than just a body of water, but the surrounding area?
Well, water is essential for life. You know, that goes without saying. And it's very difficult and often much more expensive to clean up waters that have pollutants in them than to keep waters clean. And we really saw the evidence of that with the flooding this spring. So people use the water for drinking, for recreational purposes. It's obviously important for the plants and animals that live in it and around it. And it's important for things such as fire protection, for really adding value to the community, and as a resource for everybody to share.
Okay, and I know it's a volunteer-based program. How is it that you select volunteers who could become a volunteer?
Basically, anybody can become a volunteer. We usually put the call out for volunteers in the spring. The URI News Bureau broadcasts our requests all around. And we have volunteers who, probably the youngest is maybe 9 or 10, who volunteers with their parents, to a lot of midlife adults, a lot of senior citizens. We've had volunteers start in their 70s and volunteer until their 90s. So we have a whole variety of volunteers. You don't have to have any kind of background in water quality or science. You just have to have the interest, the ability to follow the instructions, and the time to do the monitoring.
And so what is the responsibility of a volunteer?
Well, the responsibility of a volunteer is to participate in the training. Then they are assigned to a location that's of interest to them. It might be somewhere where they have a house, or they go fishing a lot or swimming a lot. And they go out, if they're monitoring a lake, they go out once a week in the middle of the day to do some monitoring. If they're on a river or a salt pond, they usually go out very early in the morning, before 8 in the morning. And they have certain monitoring tests they do on the water, and certain tests they do back on shore, and then on certain times they actually collect water samples and bring them to us in our laboratory.
Okay, and what type of tests can be performed in field, and what type do you have to go through within the lab?
Well, one of the most basic tests that's done by our lake volunteers is a measure of water clarity, and it involves using something called a Secchi disc, which was invented by Angelo Secchi, who was a captain in the Pope's Navy in the 1800s. And by now, it's the most widely used water quality monitoring device in the world. And it's really simple. It's just a disc, 8 inches in diameter, black and white, with a rope attached to it. and you lower it over a side of the boat and observe it till it disappears from view. Very, very simple.
User-friendly.
Very user-friendly, yep. And the length of the rope that you use, that you pay out to see that disc disappears is used as an indication of how clear the water is. So the shorter the rope, the less clear the water. The longer the rope, the more clear the water.
Okay.
And then our volunteers measure water temperature, which is very important for the life. A lot of the fish need certain temperatures in which to spawn and survive. Very, very important. Our volunteers measure dissolved oxygen, which again is not only essential for us, but in the water it's essential for a fish. And they also collect and filter samples that we analyze for chlorophyll in the lab that shows us the amount of algae. Our saltwater volunteers also measure salinity, or the amount of salt in their water.
Okay. And what are some freshwater or fresh bodies of water examples that you guys have been monitoring?
Oh, we started out with the Wood Pawcatuck Watershed Association in 1988, monitoring 100-acre Pond, Barber Pond, Warden's Pond, Tucker Pond, a lot of very, very widely used water bodies. Watchog Pond is a favorite, and then we branched up into North Kingstown to Silver Spring, Belleville Pond, and then we've gone all over the state where folks are interested.
As far as volunteer data, how reliable is it when they bring it back to the lab?
We find that it's very, very reliable and very valuable, and we actually test our volunteers to make sure they're doing things right. So a couple times during the season, they'll bring their dissolved oxygen kits in, and they'll test water that we have so we can see right away if they're doing it right, and also get an idea of if 80 people are testing this one sample of water, what's the range you're going to get in the answers. We also have them test their filtering procedures for chlorophyll, so those are the most important things. And a lot of it is trust, just like you're trusting anybody who does monitoring, that what you're putting in this small bottle of water is actually representative of the body of water you're monitoring. And our volunteers take their positions very seriously.
I read about the volunteer postcard, something that volunteers take out in the field with them, and then they come back, and that's how they relay the data to you. Can you explain this? I mean, what's on it?
That's their field monitoring postcard, and so they go out and they put their name, where they monitored, the date and the time, the water clarity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and the weather conditions. But just recently, we've now started with online data entry.
Oh, really?
So basically, we've replicated the postcard in an online form so people can go to their computer and enter the data that way.
I'm sure maybe that's boosted the participation of volunteers, or the reliability of the data, how quickly you get it.
It helps with the quickness of it, but what we do is we still collect the postcards because we're very careful at checking to make sure things are done right. And we notice that people will often transpose numbers on the online where they won't be so liable to do it on the postcards.
And there is some time lag between when they're actually in the field and when they come back to their computers to report the data?
Yep, that's not really
Okay.
important because the postcards get mailed to us, so that there's a time lag involved there too.
Okay. And once you have this information, what would you say it's used for within the state?
Oh, it's got a wide ranges of use. Our bacteria data usually goes online on our website within about a week, and that's used by folks who are trying to decide, is the water safe for swimming? Because there are state standards for recreational contact. And so our bacterial levels will show if it's below that standard, which means it's fine, or if it's above. And if it's above and consistently high or very high, that might trigger investigations to see what's causing that. Same with the nutrient data. We're really concerned with the ecology of our lakes and streams and salt waters. What are the normal levels of nutrients in them? If it's getting high, why is it getting high? All of these have a cascading effect. So, for example, the water clarity in lakes is often dependent on the amount of algae in the water, the amount of sediment, or the sun. So we measure water clarity in the middle of the day so we don't have to worry about the sun. And to distinguish between the amounts of algae and sediment, our volunteers measure the chlorophyll, which reflects the amount of algae. And that's a reflection, again, of the amount of phosphorus or nitrogen in the water. So we have our measurements kind of back each other up. And so we're not making our decisions just based on one thing.
Okay. And I understand that you are incorporating bodies of water into your program, new ones every year. What is the longest standing body of water that you guys have been monitoring?
Well, we've had some volunteers on certain bodies of water for 23 years now.
23 years.
Yep, and unfortunately, we don't have any of the original volunteers. They've gotten retired from monitoring or they've passed away. But we've got 23 years of data on Yawgoo and Barber Pond, on Watchog Pond, on 100 Acre Pond, and this is just invaluable because that kind of data, monitoring data, grows in value with years. And a lot of research projects are 2 or 3 years long for graduate students to get their degree. And that's kind of a typical amount of time for a research project. But monitoring is long term, and that grows and grows in value each year.
You had mentioned before the interview that a research project can be started at any point, but monitoring a year lost is lost forever.
Right.
And I thought that was very descriptive of the process that you guys go through.
And we have some volunteers who feel very guilty because they've missed a couple years.
Yeah.
And I can think of one of our other volunteers on Pascoag Reservoir who went out and did not miss a single week of monitoring. That's 6 months out of the year for 10 years. And that was his job, and he took that on, and he was great. And so he was really a model for all our volunteers, and for us too.
The program should be giving out ribbons to its best volunteers, or?
Well, we actually give awards to our volunteers.
Oh, really? Is it on the website, the URI Watershed
No,
Watch?
we haven't included anything about our actual volunteers' names and things like that yet. We're going to do that, but we're very careful. Some of them want to be anonymous. But every year we have a brunch where we give out awards and certificates to our volunteers who've monitored 5, 10, 15, and now 20 years. And we give out special awards, what we call our Watershed Stewards Awards, to folks and organizations that we really think have made quite an impact in water quality.
Okay. And I understand that in the past you have requested funding from the Rhode Island Water Resources Center.
Many years ago.
Many years ago.
Many years ago, yes.
Do you plan on asking for funding anytime in the future? And if so, what would it be for?
I think we're definitely going to explore getting some more funding. Times are tight. A lot of our municipal funding is probably going to dry up because of budget issues. We're very concerned with invasive aquatics in our lakes and ponds in Rhode Island, and starting to work more closely with volunteers to map what's there. DEM's making quite a bit of effort on that. The Rhode Island Natural History Survey is, and we are too, so we'd like to do that. And we'd also like to get our data more readily online for people to see, working with Google Maps to get the data up there faster, getting having CDs or videos of our monitoring techniques so that people don't just have to rely on reading the monitoring manuals and coming to the training, but if they want to go back and see exactly how they did that test, they can look at that online.
Can you give me a brief description of what exactly you mean by invasive aquatic species, or is that what it is? It's algae?
It's algae. A lot of it is plants, and basically it's plants that have just come in and take over, like a weed in your garden. But we can see this in our lakes and ponds, some of them. There are plants that are known to be invasives. They're not native to Rhode Island, and they're very aggressive like a weed, so they can come in and take over. And water milfoil is one of them, fanwort's one of them. We're worried about hydrilla. And once established, these plants can be very, very difficult to get rid of and very expensive. And it's the kind of thing that you may have to repeat the treatment over and over again within several years. And so we want people to identify them so we can get an idea if there's some early invasions going on. Several years ago, a graduate student doing a research wetlands project found a plant he'd never seen in Belleville Pond, and it was water chestnut, Atrapa natans. And since then, it's been found in a number of locations in Rhode Island, but DEM and the Rhode Island Natural History Survey got together with a number of volunteers and went in and hand-pulled all the water chestnut that they could find. This plant's an annual, so if you can pull it before it sets its seeds, which are very nasty, very full of thorns. And so this year, the DEM has gone back in, and in several hours, they only found a handful of plants. So that is quite remarkable. And the seeds can last 10 to 12 years, so they'll probably have to keep resurveying this. But that doesn't work in all plants. Some of the invasives, like milfoils, will fragment. So if you try to pull the plant out, or if you try and cut it with a harvester, if you don't get it all, those fragments can go out and root again.
And how does the invasion process begin?
Well, it can happen in a number of ways. Birds can bring in plants on their feet, and we're pretty sure that's how that happened with the water chestnut, because it has these prongs that can cling to fur or feathers. Unfortunately, a lot of aquatic plants come in when people go from one pond or lake to another. If they're bringing a boat, if they've got it on a trailer, if they don't make absolutely sure that every single little sprig of plant is off that trailer, it can be a route to invasion in another lake. And we've seen that in Rhode Island, where an invasive plant has come in and it's first noticed at the boat launching ramp and then spreads out from there. Another big source of invasives is people who decide they don't want their aquariums anymore, and they feel bad for the fish, they feel bad for the plants, so they decide to dump it in a local lake and pond.
I've heard some horror stories about that.
Yep, so we know that's how some plants have gotten in Rhode Island waters too, because most of the plants that are sold in aquarium stores don't have a name of an invasive, but they actually are invasives. And so Rhode Island is working very hard now to ban the invasives from entering the state. And so I'm very pleased to see that happening. But I think, what they say with a lot of these lakes and ponds, it's not if or not you have an invasive plant, it's when you're going to have it. So that's a real concern.
I guess that's where public awareness comes in, and that's where the URI Watershed Watch program can really help.
It is one way. Public awareness and education is so important. A lot of it's about changing behaviors and really thinking about things. Like one of our volunteers was commenting that he'd never, until he started monitoring, he never realized that it was not a good idea to rake leaves into his lake. And when we told him about it and how that adds nutrients into the lake and how that's not a good idea, he then went around and made posters and distributed them to all the neighbors, urging them not to rake into the lake.
Another small success story.
Yeah.
And I was reading within your volunteer pamphlet that there's a difference between shallow and deep water when it comes to monitoring. Can you explain that?
Well, yeah. In our shallow ponds, we consider those anything less than about 15 feet deep. In general, sunlight can reach pretty much to the bottom of them. And the temperature during the summertime is about the same from the top and the bottom. So the water recirculates all the time, or generally does. In our deeper water bodies, because of the layer, you get a layering effect. Just like if you recall ever diving into a lake and it's warm on top and cold on the bottom, this is what happens in these lakes and ponds. And so in those cases, the warm water has all the oxygen on top, and the cold water loses the oxygen in the bottom. And so in lakes like that, it's very important to measure the oxygen to see what's in the bottom during the season as the season progresses. So in winter and spring, you get a lot of mixing of the water, and then in the summer, it starts getting that layering called stratification, and that's when you can lose the oxygen. And then, the fish can swim away, but if you're hoping to have trout in this lake and there's no oxygen in the bottom, not going to have trout survive.
Okay. And as far as pollutants go, do you guys detect, within your monitoring, have you detected areas of greater pollution than others that possibly you didn't know about before?
Well, definitely. I mean, what's interesting is that in such an urban state as Rhode Island, we don't see as high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen that I might expect. But there are definitely problems with them, and those are the ones that cause the plant growth and the algae growth and the problems. So we definitely see that. And so sometimes our volunteers go upstream to investigate the sources. Sometimes we give the information to DEM for them to do a survey, but more often than not, the watershed groups themselves try to do the research to find out what's going on. It's really important that people recognize that the fertilizer that they put on their lawns and their gardens, if it gets into the water, it'll have the same effect. So what you use to make your lawn or garden green will also turn your water green, and you don't necessarily want your water green. So we really urge people to try to not fertilize near their water bodies, to have a natural buffer of plants, which actually will help keep the geese from being on your water, and it will help prevent the runoff. People need to be careful if they have a septic system that it's maintained properly, and to try and keep that paved area to a minimum and the natural area to a maximum. And we really saw the effects of that with the flooding in this spring. So I think people in Rhode Island really got aware of surfaces that are natural, that can be more like sponges, like our wetlands, and the hard, impervious surfaces like our roads and our roofs and our sidewalks.
Okay, and I had a question about funding, where you receive your funding from currently.
Well, funding is always an issue with any kind of program like this. We're very
It has been running 23 years now, so.
Yes. And the URI, College of the Environment and Life Science, has been a huge supporter. They provide funding to the program through a grant they get from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We've had for a number of years, we have another great supporter in Rhode Island, DEM, and they provide us some funding every year, passed through from the Environmental Protection Agency, to have volunteer monitors on lakes where they have no information or little information or old information. And a great amount of our money also comes from the groups we work with. We work with about 40 different groups, and they actually pay us to participate in the program per site per year, and it's much more reasonable than if you were going to hire a consultant. And that way, we view this as a bottom-up program, so they are having monitoring in places that are of particular concern to them. And the money helps provide for salaries, the equipment and supplies, the students, and all the analytical work. So you can't really do much without money in terms of water quality monitoring.
And does the URI Watershed Watch program support students, graduate students?
We have undergrads who work with us. We haven't had a grad student in a number of years, but we typically have 4 to 5 students who work all year round for us. We start off in the spring. We have several students who are part of the Coastal Fellows program at URI, and they have just been a marvelous addition, and we enable them to do different research projects, and then usually after their fellowships are over, they stay with us until they graduate.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of successes with our students go off to work for environmental consulting firms, for the Environmental Protection Agency, for Rhode Island DEM. So they kind of get their feet wet on campus, and then can use that besides their learning on campus to go out and garner those employment in environmental fields.
Okay, and a final question that I have is about educational courses. I understand that the URI Watershed Watch program is primarily research, but do you guys have courses or some sort of outreach for the public?
Well, we're actually primarily an outreach program.
Oh, really?
So, and that's what Cooperative Extension does,
Okay.
and that's to bring research efforts from the scientific community to people so that they can make changes and improve their lives. So we provide classroom and field training for our volunteers, and usually each summer we have a training on aquatic plants. We haven't scheduled that yet for this year, but we intend to. And that's about what we do in terms of our actual coursework. Yeah.
Well, we will certainly try to get that information out there about training courses because we'd like the public to know. But it was very nice meeting with you, and it was great talking.
Thank you very much.
And-
My pleasure.
Thank you.